Danielle moved some final exams around, and hopefully, I'm seeing her for the first time today. Hopefully she can get any additional speeding tickets to get here in time. And Mike had to leave his teaching job a little early in order to join us. Not a huge deal, but he's a stickler about cutting his history class lessons short, especially when the topic revolves around his specialty, the Guacamole Act of 1970. I appreciate all your efforts to be here. I also need to acknowledge all the hard work that goes into producing this night each year, and much of it is done by my fellow board members, the five Cavellis, John, Julie, Ralph, Laura, and Roseanne. It's also important to recognize my family and friends who attended tonight and are seated up front, as well as my Northridge crew. Thank you all for going out of your way to be here tonight. Mom, this has got to be worth 20, 30, 40 phone calls, right? You get to read that journal when you're thinking about me and I'm not calling. Yeah, 20, 30, 40. I'd also like to acknowledge my mother-in-law's valiant effort to get here in the face of some vicious flu-like symptoms the last few days. I appreciate you being here. Hope you feel better soon. And it's actually funny when I look over and I see my father-in-law over there, because it's somewhat ironic that he's the only guy I've ever met harder to beat for a dinner check than John. Those of you who tried to pay when out with either of them know exactly what I mean. I'd like to thank Sandy Grinspan in the back for taking over my journal director duties for this 1 year. The journal looks great. It's by far our biggest and most successful ever. Scoop.
I want to be
next year. It's going to be again. We allow repeats with certain financial guarantees. Anyway, as far as the journal is concerned, I certainly know how hard it is to pull it all together, especially in a year like this, and she did a great job. Thanks, Sam. You know, this next part I had a little bit of a dilemma about, but I got over it real quick. Speaking about the journal for a second, I saw that my old friend Mr. Garfinkel, he made a little attempt at humor in the journal by referring to me, the cleanup hitter, as the 10th man on our softball teams of years past. I would be remiss if I didn't scold him a bit about this, especially considering the steps I personally took to let him on his roster. I mean, 30 years ago, an openly gay player was just not there. John and I spent hours debating whether we could risk letting a guy who acted as he did on our team. But he was a decent singles hitter, and most of the time he kept his hands to himself. So we let him sit on the bench. But I digress. The fact that he showed up tonight after 25 years and flew 3,000 miles, I feel, well, I did feel a little bad about it, but I don't. I also want to say what a thrill it was to play golf this morning with my son and with three guys I've known and been great friends with for over 35 years. Last year's honoree, Mike Nardone, who's back there, Bobby Red Willoughby, and Bob Dean. Also golfing with us today and joining us tonight are my neighborhood buddies, the pizza lawyer and past honoree, Stu Steinberg, who also is a generous donor of several raffle items tonight, Steve Fuller, Chris Henn, or Senor Pepe as he likes to be referred at, and Steve Coyne, all of whom have supported this foundation and attended this event to support our efforts every single year since its inception. Joe and Rob Lennar are here as well, both major supporters in a multitude of ways, as our past honorees, Tom and Debbie Miglis, who are both huge providers of anything and everything John asks of them. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention and acknowledge Tomas Nushwanda, my good friend Lane Hanson, Bing, Billy, the Rosado brothers, and of course my main man Cecil, who years ago taught some of us here unforgettable lessons that you just can't learn in school. You're a great audience. can't walk off without telling you one story about a guy many of you have come to know and love. John Cavelli and I met 40 years ago, almost 40 years ago, and have had many, many great times together. He's always been a great friend, reliable, available, incredibly loyal, and generous, and I've watched him turn into a wonderful father and husband. However, back in the day, he was a little bit less subdued. A lot of fun, but a little nuts. That's perhaps for many of us. If that's for me, take a listen. Pat was not far off when he inscribed that book to me and wondered if any of John's friends, or John for that matter, could actually read. We've always had great times, all the way back to our days of redecorating Whiskey Reds, and all the way on up to tonight. There aren't many stories I want to share publicly, but I can assure you that few who met us or hung out with us ever would have expected for us to be up here doing this tonight. Some 30 years ago, John and I captained a summer softball team for several seasons. We traveled around challenging teams from all over Long Island. We played 3 or 4 nights a week. We were pretty good, but more importantly, we had an unbelievable amount of fun, both during the games and after the games. The highlight of everyone's summer. Anyway, we were undefeated one year. And John either made a costly error or left a few men on base during an important part of one particular game. You know where I'm going with this, right? It happens. Yeah. One of the newer guys on the team, Dennis, a guy Fonzie would certainly have referred to as a nerd, huddled us together at shortstop on our way out onto the field for the next inning and proceeded to give his win one for the Gipper speech. He pretty much wanted to tell us that we had to come back and win this game so John wouldn't feel responsible for the loss. And then he added, and I quote, "Johnny is one of the finest human beings who has ever walked the face of the earth." I repeat, ever walked the face of the earth. Now, realizing the bunch of morons we were at the time, and keeping in mind that Dennis had known John for all of 2 to 3 weeks, he might have been taking our games a bit too seriously. The entire team actually fell over laughing, gasping for air, with tears running down our faces, and we were barely able to compose ourselves in order to go out and play. The other team was startled and puzzled as to what might be occurring before their eyes. For years, we tortured John with replays of the finest human being thing, and we all still laugh each and every time anyone mentions Dennis's name. However, as the years go by, and I personally watch all the amazing things John does, the envelopes he stuffs, the calls he makes, the reaching out he does, the amazing generosity he exhibits on how hard he works to honor his brother's memory, I've come to realize that maybe we all owe Dennis a bit of an apology. One of the finest human beings ever to walk the face of the earth? No, that's probably a bit of an exaggeration. But I will tell you that the crazy kid I met almost 40 years ago has turned out to be some kind of man, and I couldn't be prouder or more privileged than I am to help him honor his brother, to have worked alongside him for the last 10 years to grow this foundation, and to be honored tonight by the foundation he and his family created. Perhaps Dennis was not that far off. Thank you all again for coming and for continuing to support the foundation. Good night.